The Pokemon world is full of people who just aren't there anymore. Scientists whose journals end mid-sentence, trainers no one will talk about, an entire building full of hostages that nobody came to save. Some of these absences are quiet, some are devastating. And the strangest part is how the games handle it. Not by explaining, but by leaving the evidence scattered around and hoping you piece it together yourself. Dr. Fuji and the vanished Cinnabar Lab team. There's a burned out mansion on Cinnabar Island that nobody in town wants to talk about. Walk inside and you'll find broken floors, wild coughing drifting through hallways, Grimir oozing across what used to be a laboratory. The place is a ruin. But scattered across the debris are journal entries, date-stamped, clinical, and deeply unsettling. July 5th, Guyana, South America. A new Pokemon was discovered deep in the jungle. February 6th, Mew gave birth. We named the newborn Mewtwo. And then, after noting that Mewtwo had become too powerful to control, the entries just stopped. No final log, no description of the disaster, no mention of what happened to the scientists. The story cuts to black mid-sentence, and you're left standing in the wreckage wondering who used to work here and whether any of them made it out alive. Here's the thing, the journals never name their author. First person, no signature, no title on the page. But Mr. Fuji, the quiet old man who runs the Pokemon house in Lavender Town, caring for orphaned and abandoned Pokemon like some kind of wasteland saint, was confirmed to have once lived in that exact mansion. Back then, he went by a different name, Dr. Fuji. Head of the Cinnabar Research Laboratory, let that sink in for a second. The guy hand-feeding berries to baby Cubone across the region is almost certainly the same person who wrote those cold, clinical entries about engineering one of the most dangerous creatures ever created. We named the newborn Mewtwo hits different when you realize the man who wrote it now spends his days atoning for it in a town full of graves, and his atonement is quiet. He never mentions Mewtwo, never references Cinnabar, never explains why he left. He just exists in Lavender Town, surrounded by Pokemon that other people threw away, doing the opposite of what he spent years doing in that lab. If that's not guilt wearing a cardigan, I don't know what is. But the really eerie part isn't Fuji himself, it's the silence around him. An entire research team worked in that mansion. Scientists, assistants, whoever was running the day-to-day of a genetic cloning operation, funded by, let's be honest, almost certainly Team Rocket. And when you arrive on Cinnabar Island, not a single NPC mentions a destroyed lab. Nobody says, oh yeah, that building exploded a few years back and a bunch of scientists disappeared. The town just exists next to a gutted facility full of poison-type Pokemon and acts like everything is fine. Which is, not ideal. Then there's Blaine. The Cinnabar gym leader keeps his gym key hidden in the basement of the Pokemon Mansion, which is either the worst security decision in Kanto or a deliberate connection to whatever happened there. His geographic overlap with the Mewtwo project is suspicious at minimum. Some fans theorize he was directly involved in the experiment, possibly as a collaborator or even a co-creator. The evidence is circumstantial, mostly vibes and proximity, but it's hard to ignore a gym leader who essentially lives in the ruins of a genetics lab and never addresses it. Team Rocket's role is the final piece that never quite clicks into place. The organization's pursuit of powerful Pokemon is well documented, and later media strongly implies they funded or exploited the Mewtwo project. But the games themselves never define the exact relationship. Were they bankrolling Fuji's research from the start? Did they muscle in after Mew was discovered? Did they show up with a briefcase full of cash and say, make us the strongest Pokemon alive, we'll handle the ethics paperwork? Nobody knows. The games leave it blank. So what you're left with is this. A man who helped create a god-tier psychic monster, survived whatever catastrophe that creation caused, and abandoned his name and his career, moved to the one town in Kanto most associated with death, and now spends his remaining years caring for the creatures he once treated as raw material. The Pokemon Mansion tells a story the games never spell out. The journal entries are breadcrumbs, the ruined floors are evidence, and Mr. Fuji's silence is the confession he'll never actually make. But at least Fuji's victims were Pokemon. The next missing people on this list were regular employees just trying to get through a workday when an entire criminal organization showed up at their office. Sylph EACO. Hostages. Here's a question nobody asks about Pokemon Red and Blue, but once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Sylph Coern is an 11-floor corporate skyscraper in Saffron City. It employs hundreds of people, scientists, engineers, clerks, executives. This company invented the Sylph Scope, a device that lets you see literal ghosts. They developed the Master Ball, technology so advanced it captures any Pokemon in existence without fail. By every measure, they are the most powerful corporation in Kanto. And Team Rocket just walks in and takes the whole building. No alarm system, no contracted trainers, no security team, not even a guy at the front desk with a Growlithe. A crime syndicate waltzes into the most technologically advanced building in the region, and every single adult inside just sits there and waits to be rescued. Here's where it gets weird. Think about what Kanto has available. You've got 8 gym leaders with fully evolved teams. You've got the Elite Four on the Indigo Plateau. You've got whatever passes for law enforcement. And when Team Rocket seizes an entire corporation and holds its employees hostage across 11 floors, the response from every one of these institutions is absolutely nothing. 0 police, 0 gym leaders, 0 Elite Four members. Sabrina is literally right there in Saffron City with psychic Pokemon powerful enough to flatten Giovanni's entire operation. She does nothing. The only person who infiltrates the building, fights through floor after floor of rocket grunts, defeats Giovanni himself, and liberates the entire workforce is a 10-year-old child who started their journey maybe 3 weeks ago. Let me explain how the hostage situation plays out, because it's darker than people remember. You walk into Sylph Co., and immediately NPCs tell you they're being held against their will. Scientists in lab coats, office workers at desks, all delivering 1 or 2 lines about how terrified they are. Please help us. Team Rocket is controlling everything. These are adults with careers and presumably families, and they are completely helpless. But here's the thing. None of them have names. Not a single hostage is given an identity beyond their sprite type. Scientist, clerk, executive, they're reduced to job titles and 2 lines of frightened dialogue. Dozens of people trapped in a hostage crisis, and the game treats them as furniture that talks. The Sylph Cumber president is found on the top floor after you've done all the work. He thanks you, gives you the Master Ball. That's it. No explanation for why his billion-dollar corporation had 0 contingency plans, no mention of a security chief who tried and failed, no resistance leader among the employees. He just sat in his office and waited for a child to fix everything. And the reason Team Rocket is there makes it even more absurd. They want the Master Ball, a prototype capable of catching any Pokemon without fail. If you're running a company that develops technology this valuable, technology a known criminal organization would kill to possess, you'd think maybe you'd invest in some protection, a few guard Pokemon, a panic button, anything, but no. Sylph Co. spent their entire budget on inventing world-changing technology and exactly 0% on keeping it safe. It's like building a nuclear reactor, knowing a crime syndicate wants to steal it, and leaving the front door unlocked. The institutional failure is genuinely unsettling. Saffron City is the largest city in Kanto. It's centrally located, it has a gym, and when organized crime takes over its most important building, the entire social infrastructure collectively shrugs. The implication is either that no authority has the power to challenge Team Rocket, which is terrifying, or that no authority cares enough to try, which might be worse. Some fans have theorized that maybe someone did try before you arrived. Maybe there was a security team that lost. But the game never mentions it. Not one NPC says others tried and failed. Not one beaten trainer lies in the hallways. The narrative presents a world where a child is simply the first and only person to attempt a rescue, which is, not ideal. The president hands you the Master Ball like he's giving you a participation trophy at a company barbecue, and life moves on. The employees go back to work. Nobody addresses the fact that their employer's complete lack of security nearly got them all killed. No institutional changes, no consequences for the system that failed them. But if you think a building full of helpless adults is disturbing, wait until you hear about a Pokemon whose mother was murdered right in front of it, and nobody in the entire world did a single thing about that either. The trainer connected to the death of Kuboni's mother. Pokemon is a franchise about friendship, adventure, and collecting cute creatures. It is also a franchise where a baby wears the skull of its dead mother on its head and cries every single night until the skull is stained with its tears. I don't know what to tell you. Kubone's Pokédex entries across multiple generations all say the same thing. It wears the skull of its deceased mother, not a skull. Not a random skull it found somewhere. Its mother's skull. This isn't fan theory or community speculation. This is the official, canonical description of a Pokemon that millions of children have caught and trained without fully processing what they're looking at. Every Cubone you've ever seen in your party is a grieving orphan wearing its parents' remains as a helmet. Cool. That's also a thing that happened, but here's where it gets genuinely dark. In the original Generation 1 games, you don't just read about this tragedy in a Pokédex entry, you walk directly into it. Lavender Town's Pokemon Tower is a graveyard, a literal multi-floor burial site for dead Pokemon, filled with mourning trainers and ghost-type encounters. The music alone tells you something is wrong. That theme is still one of the most unsettling pieces of audio in any Nintendo game. A high-pitched droning melody that sounds like it was composed specifically to make 10-year-olds feel existential dread. On the 7th floor, after you obtain the Sylph Scope from Team Rocket's hideout, a unique ghost appears. The Sylph Scope identifies it as Marowak, the evolved form of Cubone. Specifically, it's the spirit of Cubone's mother, killed by Team Rocket while she was protecting her child from capture, and you have to fight her. Not catch her, fight her. Because this encounter is hard-coded to be uncatchable. If you try to throw a Pokeball during the battle, the game simply tells you you can't catch the ghost of Marowak. It doesn't miss, it doesn't fail. The game flat out refuses to let you attempt it. Every other static Pokemon in the game, Articuno, Zapdos, Mewtwo, they all give you the option to throw. Marowak's ghost is the one encounter in the entire game where that option is taken away from you before you can even try. Players who've used glitches and cheats to bypass this restriction have confirmed that even if you force capture the ghost Marowak, it doesn't behave like a normal Pokemon. It creates glitched data because the game was never built to handle her existing in your party. The developers designed the entire sequence around the idea that this spirit must be released, not collected. You're not here to add another entry to your Pokedex. You're here to let a murdered mother rest. That's a level of intentionality that most players never see. Game Freak specifically blocked the capture mechanic for one single encounter to make it feel sacred, and it works. The battle has no music change, no fanfare. You defeat Marowak's ghost, and she simply moves on. It's one of the quietest, most emotionally loaded moments in the entire franchise, buried on the 7th floor of a tower most players rush through to get their Pokeflute. Now, here's the part that nobody really sits with long enough. Team Rocket killed her, that's established. NPCs in Lavender Town explicitly blame the organization. The Rocket grunts you fight on the upper floors of Pokemon Tower openly admit to harassing ghosts, stealing Pokemon, and terrorizing mourners. They're clearly there, doing horrible things, but not a single one of them is identified as the grunt who actually killed Cubone's mother. Think about that. You battle several Team Rocket members in that tower. You look them in the face. One of them might literally be the person who murdered a mother in front of her child, and the game never tells you which one. The killer has no name, no unique sprite, no confession dialogue, no boss fight. They're just another faceless grunt in a black uniform, indistinguishable from the dozens of others you've already beaten across Kanto. This isn't an accident. Pokemon made a very specific choice here. They put the grief front and center, they made you experience the haunting, the loss, the resolution, but they completely shielded you from the face of the person responsible. The franchise acknowledges that violence happened, that a parent was taken from a child, that the consequences are real and lasting. But it refuses to personalize the cruelty. You get the mourning, you don't get the murderer. And honestly, that says something kind of profound about how Pokemon handles its darkest material. The focus is always on what remains after tragedy, not on the act itself. Cubone still wears the skull. The ghost still haunts the tower. The baby still cries at night. But the hand that caused all of it stays permanently in shadow because showing a child the specific face of evil might be a line even Pokemon won't cross. So somewhere in Pokemon Tower, you probably punched out the grunt who killed a mother protecting her baby. You just never got to know it. And neither did Cubone. But if you think a murdered parent and a grieving orphan is the heaviest this franchise gets, wait until you hear about the Immortal King who built a weapon of mass destruction because he couldn't accept that his best friend was gone. Azed and his missing Floette. 3,000 years before you ever set foot in Kalos, a war swallowed the entire region whole. And somewhere in the middle of it, a giant of a man named Az watched his best friend get conscripted into the fighting. His Floette, this tiny, delicate flower Pokemon, was pulled into a conflict she had no business being anywhere near. She fought, and she died. Here's where most stories would end. A man loses his companion in war, grieves, and eventually moves on. But Az didn't move on. He did something far, far worse. He built a machine. Underneath what would eventually become Geosenge Town, Az constructed the ultimate weapon, a device capable of channeling the life energy of other Pokemon to achieve the impossible. He poured countless lives into this thing, drained them completely, and used that stolen energy to do what no person in the Pokemon world had ever done before. He brought Floette back from the dead, and it worked. She opened her eyes. She was alive again. Mission accomplished, right? No, because Az wasn't done. The grief had curdled into something else entirely, rage maybe, or just the understanding that as long as the war existed, he could lose her again. So he took that same machine, the one he'd built out of love, and he repurposed it into a weapon of mass destruction. He fired it. The war ended. Not through negotiation, not through victory, through annihilation. Countless Pokemon died in an instant so that no one would ever fight again. And Floette saw all of it. The Pokemon he had murdered thousands to save watched him murder thousands more. She looked at Az, at what he'd become, at what he'd done in her name, and she left. Just like that. The companion he had torn apart the laws of nature to recover walked away from him because the person she came back to wasn't the person she died for. That's not a villain origin story, that's a Greek tragedy. Here's the thing that makes AZ's punishment so uniquely cruel. The ultimate weapon didn't just end the war, it made him immortal. A side effect of channeling that much life energy, apparently, is that some of it sticks to you. So AZ didn't get to die. He didn't get to follow Floette into whatever comes after. He got to wander Kalos for 3,000 years alone, remembering exactly what he did and exactly why she left. His punishment isn't death. It's endless life without the one thing that made life worth living. 3,000 years of walking through a region that forgot the war. 3,000 years of watching Kalos rebuild itself around him while he stays frozen in that single moment of loss. People live and die around him. Cities rise, the world moves forward. AZ doesn't. That's not immortality, that's a sentence. But here's where it gets weird, and I mean weird in the most meta, fourth wall bending way possible. Eternal Flower Floette, AZ's specific Floette, exists fully coded in Pokémon X and Y's game data. We're talking unique stats, unique moves, including a signature move called Light of Ruin that no other Pokémon can learn, unique cry data, and visually distinct features, including different daisies on her flower compared to any regular Floette. She is, for all technical purposes, a complete Pokémon, ready to be distributed to players. She has never been made available, not through events, not through mystery gifts, not through any legitimate means in any Pokémon game ever released. She sits in the code, fully realized, permanently out of reach. You literally cannot have this Pokémon. And that's not a bug. That's a design choice. Think about what that means. The developers coded an entire unique form, gave it distinct everything, placed it in the files alongside every other obtainable creature in the game, and then deliberately chose to never let players access it. You can look at it in the data, you can see her cry, you can read her stats, but you cannot put her on your team. Not legitimately. Not ever. It mirrors AZ's situation so perfectly that it almost has to be intentional. He can't get her back. You can't get her either. The absence isn't just a story beat, it's baked into the actual architecture of the game itself. In the post-game, after you defeat AZ in battle, there's a brief cutscene. Floette descends from above, their eyes meet, it's quiet. There's no dialogue, no grand declaration, just two beings who were separated by 3,000 years of grief and guilt sharing a single moment of acknowledgement. And then the screen fades. No confirmation of reconciliation, no final embrace, just silence. The relationship is never resolved, not in X and Y. Not in any game since. Analysts who've tracked the franchise's distribution patterns openly doubt that Eternal Flower Floette will ever be officially released, even if Kalos gets a remake someday. The prevailing theory is that she was always meant to stay missing, that the absence is the point. And honestly, that might be the most powerful thing Pokemon has ever done with a character, because AZ's story is really the thesis of this entire video. Pokemon's world is full of people and bonds that remain permanently just out of reach. Trainers who vanished, companions who left, relationships frozen in amber, never quite resolved and never quite forgotten. And sometimes the franchise is genuinely stronger for refusing to give us the neat ending. Sometimes the empty space where a Pokemon should be tells a better story than any reunion ever could. AZ is still walking somewhere in Kalos. Floette is still out there, somewhere in the code, somewhere in the sky. And after 3,000 years, maybe that's enough. Maybe the moment their eyes met was the only closure either of them was ever going to get. Not all stories have a point, some of them are just sad and beautiful from beginning to end. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.